Genesis chapter 3 is where we're going to be today. I'm going to do something that I don't often do. It's just own personal conviction, but I think it's necessary today. I'm going to preach a sermon I preached before. I don't do that very often. We definitely revisit text on occasion, and without a doubt, we repeat things. We pick themes up from old sermons, and just, we have limited minds, and so we repeat things without a doubt. Y'all are just slow listeners, maybe. I don't know. We repeat things. I don't doubt that. But I don't repeat sermons unless the weather's bad or something like that, which I realize it is today. But 10 years ago, when Jenny was sitting on the front row, pregnant with Ella, about to become a mom, I was wrestling with the question of what does the Bible say about motherhood? And the answer isn't much. It really doesn't say much directly. There's a lot of themes that we can take, and clearly a lot of principles and concepts that we can take and apply to motherhood, which we have done over the last 10 years. And yet there's two basic characteristics, I think, that defines what it means to be a mother. And those are the issues that I continue to repeat and think about over all these years. And with us having been in Genesis chapter 2 for the last 4 weeks, I think it only makes sense for us to stay in that passage and go into Genesis chapter 3 and to revisit these two main core concepts of what it means to be a woman. So in the last 4 weeks, we've looked at, in our Before the Leave series, we were looking at what was God's intended design for marriage. And so we saw how God created Adam in the garden. It wasn't good enough without Eve. And so eventually he created Eve, and now it was perfect. They had these two complementary relationships to where now they could live out God's command. And yet we know that they didn't last before the leaves very long. It's a great debate. It's a debate our home group had. How long were they there? Was it years? Was it decades? One theologian thinks it was 45 minutes. Just knowing the nature of humanity, right? We don't know, though. What we do know is that eventually Satan lured Eve away, and Adam was being passive over to the side, and they began a conversation which she shouldn't have even been having, and Adam should have stepped in, but he didn't step in. And before long, in all-out rebellion, Adam and Eve and all of humanity fell. And the world was forever shattered, and we see that primarily in marriage and also in work, but we see the implications in everybody else's lives as well. And God comes walking through the cool of the day one day in the garden. He calls out to Adam, "Where are you?" Already knowing where Adam is, but now making Adam admit that he is hiding, and he's hiding because of the shame that he now has. And God asks, "How do you even know that you're shamed? Why do you know this? Did you eat the fruit of the tree which I commanded you not to do?" And Adam asked a very direct question. The answer there, if you're going to take personal responsibility for your actions, the answer that you want your children to have in that moment, the answer that you want to be able to provide in that moment is yes. A truthful, honest answer, all out on the table. But instead, Adam's first words when asked, "Did you do this?" The first words that Adam says is, "You know that woman that you gave me? It was her fault." Showing now the attitude and the mindset of Adam in the midst of his sin. And God, now this heartbroken father, walks into this fallen world. He doesn't run from it, but walks in the midst of it. And he begins to pronounce now consequences in response to the poor choices that humanity has made. And some of these are like a parent where God is now going to inflict these consequences into their world, now to reveal to them, to show to them that disobeying him does not pay off. But in other ways, this is not God inflicting himself upon them. Instead, it is now God in a heartbroken format saying, "I told you not to walk that way, and the reason I didn't want you to walk that way is because of the consequences that are down at the end of the path." And God begins to say, "Here are some of those consequences." And he says to the serpent, "You're going to crawl on your belly all of your life. And while you will have temporary success, nipping at the heels of humanity, the offspring of Eve will one day crush your head." It's a great picture of Jesus. Even from the very beginning, God is already talking about redemption. Even from the very beginning, God is already talking about sacrificing his son on our behalf. Even in the very beginning, God does not feel this righteous anger in this moment, but instead his love is overabounding to us, and God already has a plan in place. He talks to the woman, and then he talks to the man. And he says, "You're not going to have to work all of your life. This work that was present in the garden with this fruit that was all abundant. You could eat, you could live out your life's calling and meaning and success and value. It would mean so much to you. Now it's going to be painful toil with these thorns and thistles that are all around. Work is going to frustrate you. But before he says that to the man, he says to the woman in verse 16, I will surely multiply your pain and childbearing. In pain, you shall bring forth your children. I was talking this week, we were getting just a little bit of kickback, not much, but a little bit of kickback on our sermon a couple of weeks ago on the idea that God created us male and female. And the idea that there is a complementary relationship that is now there that's integral to the state of marriage and important to who we are and integral to the very image of God within creation. That is a biblical concept, that there's a difference between men and women, that we are not the same. That God created us differently, so he gives us different roles, different responsibilities. There's an equality that's clearly there, but we're different. I was in a conversation this week with a person, and we were talking about that. And I tried to take the conversation away from just religion. I said, well, you have to at least admit that humanity itself, that there is a special relationship between men and women and the offspring that they can now produce. So there is an importance there. There's a value that's there that sets that relationship aside as special. And this person, being an unbeliever, said, well, it might have used to been important, but it's not anymore. Said now, since we have the ability to create whatever offspring we want to create, that relationship no longer has any uniqueness. And I love it. I love it when somebody is true to their values and true to their ideas. And this person was living by his idea, what is a prevailing idea in the world today. That idea that there's no uniqueness, there's no specialness in the relationship between a man and a woman, that it's just two people or a multitude of people, whatever relationship you want to define, that there's no uniqueness within that. And whenever you begin to live that out, whenever you begin to take that train of thought and place it out, take it out further, then you have to begin to admit there's no difference between men and women. There's no value in the differences of the genders. And so if we're all going to, yes, there is an equality clearly with us all, but now we have to treat everybody exactly the same with the same expectations, and we now have to deny and downplay any differences between us, then Mother's Day isn't important because there's not a unique role a mother plays. It should just be Parents' Day. And yet, from a biblical concept, not in any way to downplay anybody that loves a child and supports them and raises them. But from a biblical concept, we are going to say there is a uniqueness to motherhood. That there's a God-created value that's there, that's important, that we want to celebrate, that we want to now call distinct from masculinity, and femininity is there, and we want to celebrate it and applaud it and say this is important to all of us and how we were created to understand what's going on. God himself, one of my favorite descriptions of God is from the Old Testament prophets, where he describes God as a she-bear robbed of her cubs. I love that image that is there because so many of our godly images are masculine images, but here you have an image of strength that is now tied into femininity, in which the prophet is going to say, you don't truly know God until you understand the love of a woman for her children. That is the first true introduction now to the very character and nature of God. We're going to say that this relationship is important, that it's valuable. But I would say from a biblical concept, that the definition of motherhood is actually much larger than just a person that delivers a child. That it goes much larger than that. And the Bible now is going to so intertwine what it means to be a mother with femininity, what it means to be a woman, that the two are almost inseparable. And so from a biblical concept, you don't necessarily become a mother the day you give birth. You become a mother just by being a woman. And so why I celebrate my mother, and I had a great mother, and this day is about her. For me, after this time that's about Jesus, sorry, Mom. But for the rest of the day that's about her, there are also other women in my life who played a mothering role to me that can also be celebrated. Also very important. As much grief as I give my sister, and rightfully so, because it's nothing in comparison to what she's done to me. being 4 years older than me, she still had this role in my life that also had a mothering concept to it. A very protective role. A role in which you could never talk about. To this day, you could never talk about me the way she talks about me. She wouldn't allow it. The teachers, the Sunday school teachers, the parents of friends. Motherhood biblically is not so tied to who delivers a child. And so even if you're going through the pains of infertility, the Bible would still honor you today as having a mothering role in this community. Even if you know the heartache of miscarriage, what it's like to have a stillborn, of maybe desperately desiring a husband and yet unable at this moment to commit your life to somebody. If you know that pain and sorrow, the Bible would still honor you as a mother, because it would say that women in general have this responsibility that's there. And I think within that come two great promises. Notice the woman's curse is a little bit different. Satan has no choice. He's going to now slither along his belly. He's going to try the best he can to nip at humanity, but Jesus is going to crush his head. He has no choice. The man has no choice. He's going to want to eat. He's going to have to eat. His very livelihood is now dependent upon him working to now provide. And so as he experiences that, there's going to come a great deal of pain and frustration. The man has no choice, but the woman does. The text says that her consequence now is that God is going to greatly increase her pain in childbearing, to which leads to the obvious question, why are you still having children? Right? And yet they do. And I've always thought that if this curse were given to men, that every family would have one child. One. Because every man in this room is arrogant enough to say, I could do that. Oh, yeah, it's going to hurt. Oh, I can do that. And then every man is cowardice enough to say, I'm never doing that again. And yet women keep on having children. Why is that? It's love. It's love. I haven't seen it as many times as 4 or 5 of you in here who do this for a living, but I'm in the room often enough immediately following a birth that I see it. And almost as soon as you walk in, the value of holding the child outweighs any hurt that woman has experienced over the previous 9 months and specifically the previous 19 hours. That love still compels. And if there's any guarantee of motherhood, I think it is this, that you're going to love. And it's such a built-in part, natural part of what God has put into place that whenever it's not present, that is now a sign that something is horribly wrong. It's a sign of, it could be a sign of postpartum depression when the mother doesn't feel this attachment to her child. And so thankfully we live in a day in which doctors and nurses can come in and to assist that process. It's now unnatural when a mother doesn't love the child. One of the basic qualities of what it means to be a mother is there's going to be so much love there. This God-placed love for that child. It's there. It's one of the greatest insights that we'll ever have to the very nature of God. So many of us in this room, before we could ever learn how to speak, we had a concept of what God's grace-filled agape love was truly all about. Because we had a mama that loved us unconditionally, irritatingly, but unconditionally. And we knew there was nothing we could ever do to break that love. That is but a shadow of God's love for us. And that love, in part, is what makes the pain in this room so great today. In the midst of all the happiness and the joy, the celebrations of baby dedications, that love also adds to the pain. In part, it adds to the pain because there are a few in this room who never knew the love of their mother for various circumstances of life, maybe her own death, maybe her own poor choices and decisions. And the gap that is now left in your heart and in your mind is almost overwhelming. It's a sign, the pain is now a sign of the truth that's there, that a mother should love a child. But for so many in this room, this day is a sorrowful day as well as a happy one because we had that love. We knew that love. We've experienced that love. And now that woman isn't here. And oh, what you wouldn't do to hear her say, I love you again. To have that opportunity to respond to her. And no matter if it's just been a few weeks or if it's been now decades since she's been gone, chances are your pain is no different. If there is anything I can guarantee a woman, it's that she is going to love. And yet with that comes the bad news, that you're also going to lose. You're going to lose. You're playing a game that you literally cannot win in perfection. You are going to love someone that will break your heart over and over and over again. Now, I can't help but think that this is more's going on here than just God saying, I'm going to increase your pain in childbearing. That this is symbolic in some way. Obviously, it's reality too. I get that. But there's more going on than just that. Because it's not the concept of, God says to Satan, you're going to experience this your whole life. God says to Adam, you're going to experience this your whole life. Hey, by the way, Eve, you only have to experience this a couple times, or 3 or 4 times, or if you're the Duggars, 19 times, right? Whatever it is, like you have a choice that's here. I think in many ways, instead, the pain in childbearing is but a symbol, but a foretaste of the pain of child rearing. Is it any wonder that 10 years ago, as we stood in this room, I stood in this room, you sat down, but as I stood in this room, and Jenny's on the front row now pregnant with Ella, and I'm preaching the sermon 10 years ago today, I'm preaching the sermon saying to Jenny, there's 2 guarantees I can give you biblically, you're going to love and you're going to lose. That as she looks back to that delivery moment on July 1st of 2005, that as she looks back on that moment, the pain that she would talk about today, if she truly knows you, if she truly is willing to open up her heart to you in the moment, the pain that she would talk about on that day is not the pain of child delivery. It's the pain of diagnosis. That's what defines that day for her. Because the diagnosis of Down syndrome is so much greater than the pain of a contraction. And the reality here, I think, that every mother in this room knows is that the pain of childbearing is but a tremor compared to the true pain of what it means to be a mom. To open up your heart with so much love, only to lose. Sometimes in very small ways, sometimes in dramatic ways. As a pastor, there's no scarier place in the hospital for me. It's not ER. It's not ICU. It's not surgery waiting room. It's not the hospice. It's not the cancer wing. There is no place in the hospital in which I'm more on edge than labor and delivery. Because I know. I don't know as well as you. Some of you know, but I know that things can go horribly wrong even here, where everybody else is happy and everybody else is celebrating. I'm not trying to now taint your celebration in any way. You should be as happy as you can be in that room. But just know that when I'm in that room, I'm praying. Because the most tears I've ever cried with church members and with friends have been in those hallways. On this earth, love has this twin, and it's called loss. And anytime you're willing to open up your heart to love someone or something, you and I will experience loss. Sometimes just because we are fallen people that live in a fallen world, we can't help it, we can't prevent it, we can't predict it. And so the pain of infertility, of stillbirth, the suffering of our own children, the childhood leukemia and cancer, all those pains and sorrows that are there that we haven't done in any way, that we would take away in a heartbeat if we could, but we can't. You're going to experience that. Sometimes it's the pain and the loss that you experience just because of your own poor decision making. Which do you think hurt Eve more? Standing there as God walked through the garden that day that her sin had been found out, or hearing word that her son had killed his brother? Can you imagine the loss that she felt in the moment and the responsibility that she felt? As her own children were beginning to experience the dark realities of the consequences of her own sin. Sadly, many of you in this room have experienced that as well. And in truth, we all have to some extent. No matter how you live, no matter how wise you think you are, no matter how smart you think you are, no matter how much you follow after God, the reality is that we're all sinners. We're all fallen, and we fall short of the glory of God. And if we have children, we will then pass on to them our own fallenness. There are some ways that Ella and Silas will be uniquely sinful simply because they're my own children. And I think so often what frustrates us the most about parenting is when our children act rebellious as we are. Some of the loss that you will experience as a mom is your children repeating your poor decisions or suffering the consequences of them, and it will break your heart. But some of the loss will actually be because of good things. If you want to know what it means to be a mom, I think it's the reality that on your child's greatest day, when your pride is beaming, when your love is overwhelming, when if you could give anything, you would give up everything for this day for them, that even in that moment, you experience grief, sorrow, and sadness. Whether it be signing up your little boy for kindergarten, or taking your little girl into elementary school for the last time, or handing them the car keys, or packing their lunch and sending them off to high school for the last time, watching them off to boot camp, in the midst of your most exciting days, watching them walk down the aisle, being the first one to hold the baby, even in your most exciting days, there's a twinge of loss because it's a reminder that your little baby is growing up. And the very point of mothering, parenting, is to grow them up and to release them. And that slow slippage out from your fingers, oh, you can see it. I was crying on the front row last week as our seniors lined up across the stage. Not because I care that much about them, I don't, but I'm not talking about that. But as they lined up across the stage and their pictures were up there, and the big picture was them all grown up, but the little picture was them preschool or kindergarten or first grade. I sat on the front row and I began to reflect back to all these kids and what they meant. So many of them were born the very year this church was born. And then suddenly it hit me. Ella and Silas's little pictures have already been taken. We could already start the slideshow. We can't fill in what they're going to become whenever they graduate. But the little cute picture that we put in the corner that everybody oohs and ahs over, it's already been snapped. And even as there is no way that I would ever turn back the clock on them or turn back time or want to stunt their growth in any way, we're doing just the opposite. We're trying to help Ella in every way, mature, try to keep up with everybody else to the best that we possibly can. And yet even as we experience these successes of her trying to keep up, trying to be average, even as we experience those successes, even in the midst of the success, there's a pain of sorrow, of loss. And a mama knows that. There's nothing you can do about it. And if there's any guarantee I can give you about motherhood on this planet, it is that you are going to love and you are going to lose. To which humanity rebels against that. We reject it. We don't want that. We don't naturally run toward things that hurt. We run from things that hurt. And so we think to ourselves, how can we protect ourselves? Can we protect our hearts? And so some write the story, all right? If love and loss are intertwined on this earth, then I'm never going to love. And so they set up these walls around their own heart and tried to stay away from the loss and the experience of that. They attempt to stay away from love, and in so doing, try to just live their own lives. How's that working for you? Try all you want to avoid the pain of loss. If you never experience what it's like to give your heart to another in love, I'm not talking about marriage or parenting. I'm talking about just an intimacy of life. If you never truly are vulnerable enough to love somebody else, the pain that you will experience will be far greater than any loss you could ever experience. And so others know. They say, I can't reject love. I have to experience love, and yet this loss comes alongside of it. And so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to control and manipulate everybody around me. Now, falling for the deception that if everybody makes good decisions, we will never experience it. And there's a bit of truth to that, just a bit. That so many of the losses that we do experience in our own lives are because of the consequences of our own bad decisions. And so we can lessen the pain to some extent. We can train our children, hopefully, and hope that they then not only have the skill to make good decisions, but then actually have the will to live those out. We can desire that. We can hope that. We can know. I know with Ella and Silas that if they will learn to make wise decisions, their life will have less pain than if they make foolish decisions. I know that. And yet there is nothing that I can do to make every decision in my life or their life to prevent any of us from experiencing loss. It's impossible. And some of you, especially moms, are living your whole life desperately trying to control everybody and everything. And the weight of that is pressing down upon you because you've written the story that if everybody will just do everything that's right, this life won't hurt. But it will. It will hurt in ways that you can't even begin to imagine it can hurt. It will hurt. And so students, know this as you're walking across that stage in a couple Friday nights, and some old guy's handing you a diploma in the exact same way he handed me one, that in that moment your mama and daddy will be up there as proud as they can be and hurting at the same time. When you walk down that aisle to the perfect man or woman, your parents will be cheering you on and crying at the same time. Because on this earth, love has a twin, and her name is loss. So what do? As a mom, you simply have to embrace the pain. She's not here, so I can tell the story now. As Jenny was delivering Ella, you get to that point where you think you can't make it. Like we can say, all right, we're just going to stop right here. Doesn't work that way, does it? And she kept on repeating, I can't do this, I can't do this. And me being a loving, compassionate husband and father kept on gently encouraging her with, you can and you will. You can and you will. You can and you will. I meant it compassionately. You can't avoid it. You have to embrace it, knowing that the love is worth it. I have bad news for you today. There is no epidural for motherhood. There isn't one. You have to embrace the pain. Yes, avoid all the pain you can by your own wise decision making. Absolutely. But recognize that that won't prevent it all. And so when it comes, you grieve it. You mourn it. You recognize your desperate need for God and His grace and His love. That this is a sad consequence of the world in which we live. Whenever your children experience the consequences of their own decision-making, or even your own decision-making that you can't do anything about anymore, you mourn it, you grieve it, you encourage them, and yet you have to embrace it. But do you know why you can embrace it? You can embrace it not only because Jesus Himself, God Himself, has given us a model, a picture that God looked down upon this planet and He loved us so much, but He knew that to reconcile us back to Himself, that to save us, it meant a sacrifice in a way that I can't even begin to imagine, that His love for us now compelled Him to experience a loss to where He would give His own Son for us, that Jesus would sacrifice and die on our behalf, that He would step outside of heaven, all the glory and joy that was known by His own identity, step into a place where nobody knew Him, where they would mock Him and scoff at Him, where they would make fun of Him whenever He was actually speaking the truth, where they would question His own desires whenever He was trying to act in a loving way, when they would actually look at love and call it hate, look at hate and call it love. Jesus experienced a loss that we can't even begin to imagine, and He did so for the joy set before Him before the cross. He did so He could be in a relationship with us. He experienced that loss because He loved us so much. And we can do the same, not only because we have the model, not only because we have the empowerment of the Holy Spirit, we can do so too because of the great truth that our loss has a limit. but God's love never does. If you are a mother, if you are a person, if you choose to love on this earth, you will experience loss. But that loss will ultimately have a sunset. There will be a day in which all the pain is wiped away. That Jesus Christ himself will return to this planet and he will make all things right. That he himself will wipe away every tear. And so every heartbroken mama who loves Jesus, her loss one day will come to an end. But her love will forever be unchanging, unending, because it is the very character and the nature of God. We can love knowing it's going to hurt because we know that one day that pain will go away. But this love will never change. You know why I love Jesus? It's because he loves the losers, the brokenhearted, the hurting. Notice the promise that came to Eve. If you take of this fruit and eat, the temptation was, you'll be like God. Oh, I want that, she thought. So she took and ate. And ironically, Satan told her a bit of the truth. But do you know when she truly felt the most like God? It wasn't when God walked through the garden. It wasn't in that moment in which she understood a lot of things. She most understood the heart of God the day it was reported to her that your son is dead and he was killed by his brother. For it's in that moment that she was like our Heavenly Father. Because we, too, God's children, have killed God's Son. And yet, thanks be to God, that in the moment of our darkest pain, whether it just be the consequence of living in this fallen world, whether it be the tragic consequence of us living out our own poor decision-making, or even worse, us watching our children live out the consequences of our decision-making, or whether it's just the pain of the life in which we live in the midst of the good that's going on, whenever we are heartbroken, God is very near to us in that moment. For you and I have a Heavenly Father who knows what it's like to love and to lose. But thanks be to God that his love is far greater than any loss we'll ever experience. Would you bow your heads in prayer with me?